Welcome to today's deep dive. If you've been joining us for a while, you know we love taking a stack of research, pulling out the most vital insights, and just giving you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
Exactly, giving you the real meat of the subject.
Right. And today we are exploring this really fascinating piece by Anita Louise Hummel. It basically breaks down the five most influential artists of all time.
Which is a huge topic, obviously.
Oh, massive. But, our mission right now isn't just to rank who painted the prettiest pictures or, I don't know, who sold for the highest auction price.
Right, because that's not what true influence is about. We are really decoding the actual mechanics of their genius here.
Yeah. We are looking at how these specific masters broke the unbreakable rules, how they shifted cultural paradigms, and it literally rewired how humanity perceives the world.
It's a fundamental shift in vision.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because by the end of this conversation, you are going to see a direct, unbreakable thread.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a thread connecting a 15th century anatomical sketch drawn with this cold, calculating precision all the way to a chaotic, jagged nightmare of a mural painted in 1937.
It is quite a journey. And, it's really important to frame it this way, because true artistic influence isn't about just making something beautiful that people want to hang in their living rooms.
Right, it's not just decoration.
Exactly. It's about creating an entirely new visual language. I mean, every time you look at a billboard, a movie screen, or even the architecture of your own city, you are seeing the downstream effects of the specific rule breakers we are talking about today.
But before you can break the rules of visual reality, you have to write them right. You have to establish the baseline.
You do. You need that foundation.
And to understand the foundation of our entire visual world, we have to start in the Renaissance with two fierce rivals. These guys essentially laid the groundwork for physical and psychological perfection in art. We're talking about Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo.
You truly cannot discuss the rules of visual reality without starting with Leonardo. I mean, you just can't.
No, absolutely not.
And to grasp his impact, you have to completely stop thinking of him as just a painter with a brush.
Right. He was so much more than that.
Leonardo was a scientist, an engineer, and a theorist. He didn't, separate art and science. They were just two intertwined tools he used to try and reverse engineer the universe.
I love that way of putting it.
Yeah, he really believed that to paint the surface of a human being accurately, you first had to understand the invisible mechanics operating underneath the skin.
And he wasn't just, guessing at proportions. The man spent countless hours in freezing morgues dissecting human cadavers.
Which was incredibly taboo at the time.
Extremely. But he was mapping out how tendons attach to bones, how muscles contract. He was even injecting wax into the ventricles of the brain to understand its shape.
That is just intense dedication.
It really is. And he studied the flight patterns of birds with aerodynamic precision and endlessly analyzed the physics of how light actually bends and scatters in the atmosphere.
What's fascinating here is how that rigorous, obsessive scientific data collection translated directly onto the canvas,
Right.
specifically through his invention of a technique called sfumato.
So sfumato translates from Italian to something like vanished or evaporated, right? Like smoke.
Precisely, it's like smoke. Before Leonardo, painters often used these hard, distinct outlines to separate objects.
Like a coloring book.
Exactly. Very rigid, like a coloring book. But Leonardo realized that in the natural world, the human eye doesn't actually see hard lines. We see gradual transitions of light and shadow.
Because of the atmosphere.
Right. So he developed sfumato, which involves applying dozens of microscopic translucent layers of oil glaze over years. He blended colors and tones so subtly that the transitions become imperceptible. It creates this smoky, atmospheric depth that breathes actual biological life into a flat wooden panel. I mean, you see the ultimate culmination of this in the Mona Lisa.
We all know the painting, but, the technique explains why she feels so alive. That famously ambiguous smile isn't just a clever drawing.
No, it's an optical trick.
Exactly. He blurred the corners of her mouth and the outer edges of her eyes using sfumato, so your brain can never quite lock onto her exact expression.
He used atmospheric physics to manufacture psychological mystery.
That's wild.
And he used mathematical geometry to manufacture focus. If you look at the Last Supper, it isn't just a biblical scene. It is a masterclass in the invention of linear perspective.
Oh, the perspective in that is incredible.
He engineered the entire composition, the angles of the ceiling, the lines of the table, the architecture of the room, so that every single orthogonal line, every vanishing point, converges perfectly on the right eye of Christ.
So he turns the two-dimensional wall into a three-dimensional funnel.
Exactly. A funnel that dictates exactly where your eye has to look, all while managing the chaotic psychological reactions of 12 different men.
Okay, so if Leonardo is this brilliant data scientist mapping out the human condition from the ground up using empirical data and geometry, his contemporary and bitter rival, Michelangelo, feels entirely different.
Very different energy.
Yeah, he feels like a blockbuster movie director creating these sweeping, heroic spectacles of human potential.
That contrast is vital. While Leonardo quietly observed and recorded the world, Michelangelo essentially sought to conquer it.
Conquer is definitely the right word for him.
He was a sculptor first and foremost, and his creations were of such sheer, overwhelming scale and dramatic intensity that his contemporaries literally called him Il Divino, which means the Divine One.
And his entire philosophy on creation was vastly different from Leonardo's scientific approach.
Completely opposite, really.
Michelangelo believed that the perfect figure was already trapped inside the block of raw marble. He wasn't building something from scratch. He was just like chipping away the excess stone to set the divine form free.
His primary contribution to the visual language was this absolute mastery of exaggerated, heroic human anatomy. And he combined that with a concept the Italians called terribilità.
It sounds like terrible, but it means something much more awe-inspiring, right?
Right. It doesn't mean bad. It translates to a sense of overwhelming grandeur, passion, and even terror.
Like staring at a storm.
Exactly. The feeling you get when you stand next to a massive waterfall or a thunderstorm. You see it perfectly in his 17-foot marble statue of David.
Which is huge, by the way.
Massive. Prior to Michelangelo, artists typically sculpted David after the battle, standing victoriously over Goliath's severed head. But Michelangelo sculpts him in the tense, anxiety-ridden, hyper-focused moment right before the battle.
Oh, that's such a great detail.
The muscles are coiled, the veins in his hands are bulging. He captures the psychological terror of anticipation.
And you see that same tension on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, the sheer physical agony of painting frescoes on a ceiling for 4 years aside, there's one specific detail in the creation of Adam that always stops me in my tracks.
I think I know which one you're going to say.
It's that tiny, brilliant 1 millimeter gap of negative space between the reaching finger of God and the finger of Adam.
It's iconic.
The actual spark of life isn't shown, right? It's implied in the tension of that microscopic gap.
It remains one of the most brilliant compositional choices in the history of visual art. Michelangelo pushed the physical form to its absolute heroic zenith. He really set a standard for anatomical drama that academies still teach today.
I have to challenge this dynamic a bit, though.
Okay, let's hear it.
If Michelangelo genuinely believed the figure was already perfectly formed inside the stone, doesn't that make him more of a spiritual excavator than an actual inventor?
That's an interesting way to put it.
Right. Especially when you compare him to Leonardo, who was literally inventing the rules of atmospheric depth and linear perspective from pure scientific observation.
Well, Michelangelo viewed himself as a conduit for divine truth, whereas Leonardo was a human engineer building the illusion of reality layer by layer.
So one is uncovering perfection, the other is calculating it.
Exactly. But functionally, for the artists who followed them, the result was the same. Together, they wrote the definitive rulebook for the Renaissance.
They proved that human hands could achieve absolute, flawless, indoor, highly polished perfection.
But history doesn't stay still.
No, it never does. Once you've spent a few centuries adhering to those perfect, mathematically precise studio rules, what happens when a new generation decides that perfection is actually a lie?
That's when things get messy.
Exactly. What happens when you throw the rulebook out the window, pack up your canvas, and drag it into the messy, unpredictable, rapidly industrializing outdoors?
You get Claude Monet and the birth of Impressionism.
To really grasp the shockwave Monet caused, you have to understand the suffocating environment he was working in during the mid-19th century.
The French art establishment was basically a dictatorship.
Exactly. It was known as the Salon, and they held a total monopoly on what was considered legitimate art. If the Salon rejected you, you didn't have a career. Period.
And the Salon's rules were incredibly rigid. They dictated that acceptable art had to be highly polished, completely devoid of visible brushstrokes, and painted entirely indoors in controlled studios.
So boring by today's standards.
Very restricted. The subject matter had to be important, mythological epics, grand historical battles or biblical scenes, and it all had to be painted in these dark, heavily varnished tones.
Monet and a group of radical peers looked at that system and completely rejected it. They didn't want to paint ancient history, They wanted to paint modern life.
They wanted to paint what was right in front of them.
And they wanted to do it on plein air, which means out in the open air.
Yeah.
But going outside meant you had to paint fast, before the sun moved and the weather changed.
The ability to even paint outside was partly driven by a relatively mundane technological invention.
Oh, the paint tubes.
Right, the collapsible tin paint tube. Before that, artists stored paint in pig bladders, which were just incredibly messy and burst easily.
Ugh, I can't even imagine carrying those around.
It was a nightmare. But the tin tube allowed Monet to take his entire studio into a field. And once he was out there, he realized something profound, which is actually a major takeaway from our source material.
What was it?
Monet realized that the human eye doesn't actually see objects. We only see light bouncing off objects.
Wow. That is a staggering philosophical shift.
Changes everything.
He wasn't painting a cathedral or a haystack. He was painting the temporary envelope of light surrounding the cathedral or the haystack.
To capture that fleeting light, Monet had to abandon the smooth, blended sfumato of Leonardo. He couldn't take years to glaze a painting.
Right, the sun is moving.
Exactly. Instead, he developed a technique of using rapid, broken brushstrokes of pure, unmixed color. Rather than mixing blue and yellow paint on his palette to make a flat, dead green, he would place a tiny stroke of pure blue right next to a tiny stroke of pure yellow on the canvas.
Oh, so your eye does the work.
Yes. When you step back, your retina optically mixes the two colors together. It creates a vibrant, vibrating green that actually mimics the active physics of sunlight.
It's basically optical engineering, and it led to the painting that accidentally named the entire revolution.
Impression sunrise.
Right. It's this hazy, loose, almost chaotic depiction of a harbor at dawn. You can see the thick strokes of orange representing the sun reflecting on the water. Today, we think it's an absolute masterpiece, but at the time, critics literally used the word impressionism as an insult.
They did. They thought the painting was just an unfinished sketch, like a joke.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, Monet's true legacy is the democratization of sight, right?
Absolutely. By proving that the actual subject of art is light itself, he proved that a busy train station filled with modern steam, a simple haystack in a field, or a quiet lily pond is just as worthy of a masterpiece as a grand historical battle.
The subject didn't matter anymore. The optical sensation mattered.
He spent his later years in his garden in Giverny, painting massive canvases of water lilies that focused entirely on reflections and light. He was pushing art right to the absolute edge of total abstraction.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I like to think of the transition from the Renaissance to Impressionism, like the evolution of photography.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. The Renaissance is a highly staged, heavily photoshopped, perfectly lit studio portrait where every single hair is in place. Impressionism is a candid Polaroid.
Yes, exactly.
It's raw, it's immediate, and it captures the exact unfiltered vibe of a split second in time. It doesn't care about perfect outlines, it cares about the flash of light.
And by shifting the focus away from perfect structural outlines and toward pure sensation, Monet inadvertently cracked the door open for artists to start prioritizing internal emotion over external reality.
Which brings us to a massive pivot. Monet spent his life capturing fleeting external sunlight. Vincent van Gogh took those vibrant, vibrating colors and turned them violently inward.
A total shift in perspective.
He used color and texture, not to show you what the world looked like, but to expose the raw weather of the human soul.
If Leonardo represents the cold, calculating intellectual summit of art history, Van Gogh absolutely represents its raw, beating emotional core.
He really does.
He was a Dutch post-impressionist whose actual life was a tragic sequence of severe mental illness, profound isolation, and grinding poverty. But his work ethic, it was just staggering.
The sheer volume of what he produced is really hard to wrap your head around. I mean, he came to art relatively late, really only dedicating himself to it in his late 20s.
Right, he wasn't a child prodigy.
Not at all. And yet, in just over a decade, he produced roughly 2,100 artworks, including around 860 oil paintings.
It's an explosive, almost frantic level of output.
We are talking about a new painting every 36 hours. And despite all that, he famously sold only one painting during his entire life.
It is a bitter historical irony that today his works are among the most fiercely guarded and expensive objects humanity has ever produced.
It breaks your heart a little bit.
It really does. His profound contribution to the visual language was his complete disregard for optical reality. He realized color didn't have to be descriptive, it could be expressive.
And he didn't just use color to express emotion, he used the actual physical weight of the paint through his mastery of impasto.
Impasto is such a visceral technique. It's where the paint is applied so thickly that the brush or palette knife strokes literally stand out from the canvas.
Like 3D texture.
Exactly. When you stand inches away from a Van Gogh in a museum, you aren't looking at a flat image. You are looking at a sculptural topography of paint. You can trace the aggressive physical movement of his hand. You feel his urgency.
And you really see that urgency radiating from the starry night. He painted that masterpiece while looking out the window of an asylum in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence.
Such a powerful piece.
But if you look at the astronomical records for that night, the sky didn't actually look like a swirling, turbulent vortex of blue and yellow energy.
No, of course not.
He wasn't painting the optical truth of the night sky, he was painting the psychological truth of his own turbulent mind.
He achieved a similar emotional frequency with his Sunflower series, too. He took the color yellow, a color often associated with happiness, and manipulated it to show the entire brutal life cycle of the flowers.
From bursting vital bloom to heavy drooping decay.
Yes. He made the color itself sing with a kind of desperate vitality.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's return to our photography analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
If Monet is the candid Polaroid of a beautiful sunset, Van Gogh is the jagged line of a heart rate monitor recording the emotional spike of the person looking at that sunset.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
He really paved the way for the entire expressionist movement. He proved that art isn't about replicating the visual world, it's about manifesting how your soul feels when it collides with the visual world.
I do wonder, though.
Yeah.
By completely abandoning objective reality, by distorting perspective and painting skies as swirling energy fields, just because that's how his mental state felt, didn't Van Gogh risk completely alienating the viewer?
That's a valid question.
I mean, why doesn't the starry night just look like the incomprehensible ramblings of a sick man? Why is that exact unfiltered vulnerability the very thing that makes his work the most resonant art in the world today?
Because while pure realism is impressive, pure emotion is universally recognizable. We may not all understand the mathematics of linear perspective, but every single human being understands what internal turbulence feels like.
That makes a lot of sense.
We know what isolation feels like. Van Gogh managed to bottle the human condition in thick tubes of oil paint. He shattered the rule that a painting had to faithfully copy reality.
Okay, so we've achieved physical perfection with the Renaissance. We've captured the fleeting optics of atmospheric light with the Impressionists, and we've mapped the raw, internal, emotional landscape with Van Gogh.
I covered a lot of ground.
We really have. And you have to ask, what is possibly left for the 20th century to do?
Well, when the structure of reality has been perfectly built, perfectly lit, and perfectly felt, the only avant-garde move left is to take a sledgehammer and intentionally smash the entire structure to pieces.
Enter Pablo Picasso, the man who looked at the 400-year-old traditions established by Leonardo and Michelangelo and just violently deconstructed them.
Picasso is the undeniable driving force behind modernism. And, it is absolutely crucial to understand that he didn't smash the rules because he lacked the technical skill to follow them.
Right. He wasn't doing it because he couldn't paint properly?
Not at all. Picasso was a bona fide child prodigy. He had completely mastered classical Renaissance-level realism by the time he was 14 years old.
14. That's unbelievable.
It is. He has a very telling quote where he says, "It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child."
Because he had already conquered the traditional techniques, he just found them boring. And he realized that the invention of photography in the 19th century meant that painting no longer needed to serve as a historical record.
Exactly. A camera could capture reality perfectly in a fraction of a second. So painting had to do something a camera could never do.
Which led to his most monumental invention, alongside Georges Braque, Cubism.
And this is where we see the direct assassination of Leonardo da Vinci's legacy.
Yes. Leonardo invented linear perspective to trick the viewer's eye into seeing three-dimensional space on a flat, two-dimensional canvas.
And Picasso comes along and says, "Why are we lying? The canvas is flat." Instead of pretending there is depth, let's take a three-dimensional object, fracture it into geometric facets, and unfold it so we can see the front, the side, and the back, all at the exact same time.
This raises an important question about the nature of time in art, doesn't it?
It really does. A traditional Renaissance painting freezes a single millisecond, but Cubism compresses time. It represents the experience of walking around an object over several minutes, but pasting all those different viewpoints onto one flat plane simultaneously.
Which is mind-bending. Just look at Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, painted in 1907. It's an aggressively flattened, jagged, almost hostile depiction of five figures wearing what look like Iberian and African masks.
It abandoned all known rules of perspective, proportion, and anatomical sense.
When he first unveiled it, even his own friends were horrified. But it essentially launched modernism overnight.
And then he applies that fractured language to human tragedy with Guernica.
Oh, Guernica is just haunting. It's a massive mural painted entirely in stark black, white, and gray, depicting the aerial bombing of a Basque town during the Spanish Civil War.
If he had painted it realistically, it would have just looked like a news photograph.
Right. But by using Cubism, by twisting the screaming horses, fracturing the faces of the grieving mothers, and tearing the forms apart, it physically manifests the chaos and horror of modern mechanized warfare.
It remains the ultimate anti-war painting because the shattered technique perfectly matches the shattered reality of the 20th century.
Picasso really is the cornerstone of contemporary art because he completely liberated artists from the obligation of copying reality.
By proving that you could deconstruct the visual world and reassemble it into an entirely new intellectual framework, he opened the floodgates.
Without Picasso destroying the rules, you do not get surrealism. You do not get abstract expressionism.
The entire trajectory of the 20th century hinges on his willingness to fracture the image.
He's like a rogue engineer. He takes apart a perfectly functioning machine, the classical rules of art, just to see if the engine will still run when he reassembles the parts in the wrong order.
That's a great way to think about it.
But considering his background, do you think it's a prerequisite? I mean, since Picasso had already mastered classical realism as a young teen, does that prove you have to intimately know the rules of reality before you can effectively break them?
Art historians love to debate this, but generally, yes. You have to know exactly where the structural, load-bearing walls are before you can safely demolish a house without it just turning into an unreadable pile of rubble.
That makes total sense.
Picasso's abstractions possess so much power precisely because they are intentional, calculated deviations from a mastery of form. He wasn't guessing how an arm looked. He was actively choosing to rebel against it.
And that continuous rebellion completely shaped the world you and I live in today. When we look back at the sources covering these five masters, Leonardo, Michelangelo, Monet, Van Gogh, and Picasso, a distinct evolutionary thread emerges.
It really does. Leonardo and Michelangelo built the foundation. They proved that human hands could achieve mathematical and physical perfection in a controlled environment.
And then, centuries later, Monet dragged that perfection out of the dark studios and into the sunlight. He proved that reality is just a byproduct of fleeting optical light.
Then Van Gogh took that external sunlight and turned it inward, proving that color could map the raw emotion of the human soul.
And finally, Picasso took that entire established structure, looked at a modernizing world, and just smashed visual reality into pieces to reflect the fractured nature of the 20th century.
You literally cannot imagine our modern visual world, the advertisements targeting you, the cinematography of the movies you watch, the graphic design on your phone screen, without the aesthetic boundaries that these five specific masters relentlessly pushed.
They didn't just put paint on canvas. They taught the human brain entirely new ways to process visual information.
They gave us the vocabulary we use to see the world.
Which leaves us with a pretty massive, provocative thought to chew on as we wrap up.
Oh, definitely.
If the history of human vision is essentially just a timeline of brilliant rebels breaking the unbreakable rules of the generation that came before them, what unbreakable visual rule of our modern, hyper-digital, AI-driven era is waiting to be smashed right now?
It's a crazy thought. Who is the next master out there, quietly getting ready to take a sledgehammer to how we view reality?
The next pioneer is out there right now, looking at our digital screens, figuring out exactly how to fracture them into something we've never seen before.
It's a thrilling and maybe slightly terrifying thought.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into visual history. If you want to keep exploring the ideas that shape our world, please make sure to subscribe to our podcast, our YouTube channel, and our newsletter. And check out our blog for more great info.
We always love unpacking these monumental shifts with you.
So the next time you look at a crisp, perfectly calculated digital image, remember the obsessive precision of that 15th century anatomical drawing.
When you see a chaotic, fractured piece of modern media, remember the jagged edges of that 1937 mural.
The thread is always there, binding the pursuit of perfection to the thrill of breaking it. Keep your eyes open, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.